They hadn't said a word since the restaurant. The soft thud of the tires on the asphalt was the only sound filling the silence. I sat in the back seat, staring blankly at the back of Clayton's head. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Meredith sat beside him, her lips pursed, arms folded like she was holding in every ounce of rage she didn't want to spill in public. Then the car slowed. No blinkers. No warning. Just the smooth deceleration into a shoulder off Interstate 41, somewhere just past Fresno. There was no exit ramp. No signs. Just barren highway and bitter early winter air crawling across the windows. Clayton shifted into park. Meredith twisted in her seat, a small black canvas bag in hand. She didn't look at me when she said it. Get out. Do whatever you want. It didn't register. My fingers tightened on the seatbelt. I laughed, the kind that begs for reassurance. Wait, what? Now, Odessa. Clayton's voice was flat. Distant. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then Meredith opened her door, walked around, opened mine, and dropped the bag into my lap. You said you wanted freedom, she said. So here it is. She didn't wait for my answer. She shut the door, got back in the car, and before I could stand up, the engine roared and the SUV pulled away, tires spitting gravel in its wake. The taillights disappeared. And then there was just me. On a stretch of road where headlights never came. No wallet. No map. No one. My phone had 2 bars. No signal. It hit differently when your own blood draws the line. When they decide your existence is a burden too heavy to carry. Have you ever been abandoned by the very people who promised to protect you? I checked my phone. Every banking app one tried flashed the same message, access denied. Account restricted. Even the joint card I had with Meredith was locked. I tapped Trinley's number. Straight to voicemail. Again. Again. Her inbox was full. A bitter laugh slipped out. Beckham once joked I'd get cut off for being dramatic. He was right. Just not in the way he thought. I found a gas station blinking in the distance and walked toward it, the wind peeling at my jacket. Inside, it smelled of burnt coffee and bleach. I asked to use the restroom. The cashier eyed me like I was trying to steal something. You need the key, he said, jerking a thumb toward the counter. Then, squinting at me, he added, Hey, aren't you that girl from Facebook? The one they said ran away or something? Parents said you're unstable. Unstable. I didn't reply. I just took the key and walked away. Hands shaking. What would you do if your name became a lie? And the lie was told by your own family? The library was open late. Bless small towns and their underfunded havens. I took a seat near the back, plugged into Wi-Fi, and checked my email. Dozens of messages, each one worse than the last. You need help. This isn't healthy. Stop trying to ruin your parents' reputation. And then one from Clayton. This is what you wanted, right? Independence? I stared at the words for a long time. No anger. No tears. Just understanding. They wanted me to break. That was the point. They wanted me to crawl back. That was the game. But I wasn't playing. I began collecting everything. Screenshots of locked accounts, emails, dates. Every scrap of evidence. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. My grandmother Francesca once whispered to me after a family fight. You don't have to scream to win. Just outlive their cruelty. Tonight, her voice was the loudest thing I heard. I opened tabs for shelters, legal aid, any place that didn't ask for first-month deposits or clean histories. I found forums where women like me shared horror stories of being erased digitally and how they clawed their way back. One step at a time. Would you let pride keep you standing? Or would you crawl back just to survive? When the library lights flickered, I knew morning had arrived. I walked 5 miles in cold wind to a dusty rental center. An old man named Rudy stood behind the counter, face lined like a map of past regrets. You look like you got nowhere else to go, he said. Then handed me the keys to a rundown sedan. Pay when you can. Just don't get it towed. I didn't say thank you. I couldn't. The words would crack me. As I drove down the same stretch of road where they'd left me, I slowed. My boots had left marks in the frost. Still there. I didn't stop. Just stared through the rear view. You told me to do whatever I want, I whispered. Fine. I will. A ping. New email. No subject. Just the words. They're hiding something. You need to know. No name. No clue. But it was enough. I took the first exit off the freeway. Not to disappear. To begin. Have you ever had to start your life with nothing except the truth? I found myself in front of a white paneled house with rose vines crawling up the porch railings. The last time I'd been here, I was 9, hiding behind my mother's leg while she and Aunt Geraldine argued in half-whispers about something neither of them ever named. Still, Geraldine had smiled at me then. She smiled now too, when she cracked the door open. That smile faltered the second I said, "It's me. Odessa." She didn't open the screen door. Her eyes flickered, her voice lowering. Odessa, honey, I don't think it's a good idea you being here. I blinked. I just need a night. Just one. She sighed. I saw your mama's post. Said you're having one of your episodes. That you get dangerous when you're off your meds. I didn't have any episodes. I didn't even take medication. But none of that mattered now. I can't have trouble here, she added, almost kindly. I've got the twins. I nodded slowly. I understand. She shut the door with a soft click. And I walked down those porch steps like they were a stage I'd never asked to stand on. Has someone ever painted you into a villain before you even got to speak? The city air grew heavier with every block I walked. At a women's shelter near downtown Fresno, I handed over my ID, trying not to look like I hadn't slept in 36 hours. The intake worker, a tired woman with tired eyes, scanned my card. Her expression changed immediately. I'm sorry, she said, voice low. We can't check you in. My throat tightened. Why not? There's an alert in the system. Someone flagged your name and ID under mental health risk, unstable, possibly violent. We can't override it. I felt the blood leave my face. That's not true. I believe you, she whispered. This happens more than you think. Flashback. 3 years ago, Meredith had insisted I give her my social security number just in case you're in an accident. She said it was about trust. Now that same trust had been weaponized. I don't have a legal guardian, I muttered, looking at the screen she was trying to hide. Meredith had listed herself on record as mine. You're over 18? The woman asked. 23. She nodded and, after a glance over her shoulder, scribbled a number on a post-it. Call this. They deal with things no one else touches. Burn the paper after. The door closed behind me again. If your name and face were used against you, how would you prove who you really are? I sat in the corner booth of the library and booted up one of their ancient desktops. It took 4 minutes just to load Chrome. Then I saw it. My name on local forums, Reddit threads, Facebook neighborhood groups. Odessa Ruel spotted near Shaw Avenue. Possible psychotic break. Do not approach. Attached, a pixelated clip of me screaming during a fight with Beckham at a party 2 years ago. I'd been trying to leave. He'd blocked the door. But the footage was cropped. Edited. A joke in the comments, Karen's got nothing on this meltdown. It was posted by an account named Jules Fresno 77. Jolene. I checked metadata. Dozens of sock puppet accounts. All posting slight variations of the same story. It wasn't just a smear campaign. It was systematic erasure. And then there was a clip, intimate. Me in a hoodie, crying alone in my old room. Trinley had filmed it. I never knew. I closed every tab. Deleted every trace of my old online self. Rage didn't scream in me anymore. It burned slow. I'd rebuild it all from scratch. No past, no shame, no handouts. What if everything you ever said in a moment of vulnerability was turned into evidence against you? Back in the car, I opened the email. From Mara Vix. Subject, your signature isn't yours. There was a PDF attachment, a scanned deed for a storage lot Francesca had owned. And at the bottom, my signature. Only I'd never signed it. My heart pounded. The form was dated 6 months ago. I hadn't even known Francesca left me anything. I read it again. Then again. And there, Jolene's name. Not as a witness. As the buyer. Using my forged signature. I sat back. Cold settling deeper than before. I printed it at a 24-hour copy center and slid it into the first sheet protector of a cheap binder I bought with my last $20. On the cover I wrote in bold black ink. The Book of Proof. This wasn't just resentment. This was premeditated. This was bureaucracy disguised as family. This was theft, abuse, silence wrapped in legalese and fake concern. How far would your own family go to erase you without laying a finger on you? I stared at the ceiling of the car for a long time. Breathing. Thinking. Then I whispered, if they want me to be the ghost, I'll haunt every lie they built. The library was quiet in the way hospitals sometimes are, peaceful on the surface, but if you listened closely, you could hear things breaking. I sat hunched over a table near the reading room, surrounded by half-torn notebook pages I'd found in the donation bin. The pen I borrowed from the librarian squeaked faintly as I pressed too hard against the paper. Dear Meredith, I wrote. I didn't intend to send it. This wasn't for her. It was for me. I started with the earliest memories. How she'd grip my shoulder too tightly when she smiled at others. How birthdays felt like brief truce days in a war I never understood. How silence was her favorite punishment, long, drawn out, loaded with shame. You didn't throw me away at the highway, I wrote. You did it long before. That was just the last time. I listed them all, the things I was too scared to name before, now bleeding onto lined paper with ink that ran slightly from my grip. Slights disguised as jokes. Help offered like weapons. The days she told me my tears were exhausting. The night she turned the TV louder to drown out my sobs. When I finished, I folded the pages into neat squares and slid them into a worn anthology of essays about forgiveness. Not a message. A ritual. I wasn't asking her to read it. I was finally done explaining myself. Have you ever said everything you needed to without sending a word? The library lights hummed above me as my fingers dug through old emails. Something in my mind had cracked open, a memory I hadn't wanted. 14 years old. Standing in the hallway, I'd overheard Beckham telling Meredith, "She's too emotional to be trusted." Back then, I thought that meant I had to try harder. Now I knew better. "You're the baby, you don't understand," they'd say. But I remembered the folder Clayton handed me on my 18th birthday. "Your gift," he called it, smiling like a pastor at a baptism. I never read it all. Just the surface: congratulations, adulthood, responsibility. I found the scan in my Gmail archive, still marked unread. My signature. Underneath a document titled, Property Transfer Agreement, Authorized Recipient, Beckham Ruel. The description said, "For purposes of simplifying family trust logistics." I had signed away something. I didn't even know what yet. But my name was there. They'd raised me like a project. Coached me in compliance. Masked control as kindness. Every gift was a leash. When does a gift stop being a gift and become a trap? I walked 2 blocks to the legal aid booth behind the bus depot, a temporary setup run by local volunteers. The young woman there had tired eyes but a clear voice. "If they made you sign something under false pretenses," she said, "that's coercion. Especially if you were emotionally manipulated. We see it a lot with family power of attorney cases." I showed her the scan. She whistled low. "This wasn't for your benefit." I nodded. Later, I searched public deed records on the library desktop. There it was. Francesca's storage unit, once listed under my name. Now under Beckham's. I remembered the velvet boxes of antique jewelry Francesca used to polish while humming, promising me one day, "These will be yours." The paper I'd signed called it a trust simplification. What it meant was, they stole it. They didn't just lie, I whispered. They made lying look like love. Have you ever been told, "It's just paperwork," and found out it was your freedom? The sun was sinking behind the library blinds when I dug through my trash folder. Old forwarded messages, spam, pharmacy notifications, and then it appeared. A PDF sent from Trinley's account 6 months ago. Subject, "For your records." It was a medical note. Dr. Howard Lee, the therapist Meredith made me see after Francesca passed. I had 2 sessions. Mostly I cried and he listened. Now here was his letter. Polite language. Subtle phrasing. But clear implications. She displays tendencies consistent with emotionally reactive processing and may not presently meet thresholds of rational autonomy under pressure. I read it again. He hadn't said I was unstable. He'd said I might be. Enough to raise a doubt. Enough to lose everything. I stared at it. The signature. The timestamp. Meredith had always called him a family friend. I emailed the clinic requesting all my medical records. I needed a timeline. A paper trail. A way to turn their whispers into proof. What if the people who said they loved you prepared your funeral while you were still breathing? Outside, the sky was bruising with dusk. I printed the email. Folded it once. Slipped it into the back of the binder labeled the Book of Proof. Then I whispered, "They're not preparing to hurt me. They already started. The sky was bruised gray when I finally dialed Trinley. I held the burner phone tightly, like it could burn through the chill in my palms. Her voice came alive on the other end with that warm softness she always had. She told me I could stay for a few days. No questions. No judgment. Just warmth. I almost believed it. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and stale textbooks. The guest blanket still had the same floral pattern from college. For a second, I let myself exhale. It was the first bed in weeks that didn't hum like a park bench under cold metal light. I fell asleep thinking maybe, just maybe, this was Mercy. But Mercy whispered behind closed doors. I woke up to her voice in the hallway, hushed but hurried. Yes, she's here. No, she doesn't suspect. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. She said my name. She said Meredith's name. I confronted her. No screaming, no storm. Just the question, why? Trinley burst into tears before I could finish. They paid me. I thought it was just to check on you. I didn't think they were, Odessa, I didn't know. She tried to grab my hand. I stepped back like her fingers were knives. You sold me out for a phone call. I left without looking back, the warmth trailing behind me like a lie. Ever been helped by someone whose kindness came with a hidden invoice? That night, I returned to the library, hoping for some version of steady light. At the front desk, a sealed envelope sat with my name written in perfect blue ink. No return address. Inside was a printed notice. A civil action. Beckham's name listed as plaintiff. Accusations, defamation, unlawful entry, threats of emotional harassment. It read official, enough to scare anyone who'd never seen a courtroom. But I wasn't anyone anymore. I walked it straight to Dorian. He flipped through the pages, squinted, then laughed under his breath. This isn't real, he said. They used a fake template and forged half the language. He showed me where the formatting fell apart. Where legal jargon didn't match real procedures. And then he leaned forward. They're testing how far you'll bend before you break. I didn't bend. I scanned every page. Logged it. Filed it in the book of proof. Let them play their games. When someone tries to frighten you into silence, what happens if you simply stop being afraid? The shelters were full that week. No open bunks. I didn't bother asking again. Instead, I found a bench near the courthouse plaza, where the lights never shut off and people slept sitting up with coats pulled over their heads like ghosts. I sat with my legs crossed, backpack hugged to my chest, eyes watching nothing. A volunteer came by with soup in paper cups. I declined. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because I wanted to remember what it meant to go without and not flinch. I pulled out the burner phone and sent one message, need contact, V. No reply. Hours passed. Fog rolled in. Then, near midnight, a stranger walked past. Didn't look at me. Just dropped something on the bench. An envelope. Inside was a flash drive. Labeled, ruwelcam.mp4. I watched it the next morning, back at the library. It started with a view of my old bedroom, before I left. The camera had been hidden behind a wall sconce, angled just enough to capture me pacing, crying, undressing. Unaware. Beckham's voice appeared faintly in the background once. Jolene's laughter overlapped later. The file date predated my episode. They'd watched me. Studied me. Built a narrative not from concern, but control. Would you rather know you were being watched or live in peace never finding out? I didn't cry. I printed stills of the footage, labeled everything. Dorian reviewed the metadata. This, he said, is enough for a federal case. Invasion of privacy. Possibly stalking. I nodded, hands shaking, but not from fear. From focus. If they wanted me broken, I'd become unbreakable. Each piece of evidence became a brick. I wasn't building a wall. I was building a courtroom. I began journaling timestamps. Collecting names. Recording calls. Every interaction documented. Winter wasn't a season anymore, it was a crucible. Winter used to mean family dinners, I whispered as snow began to fall outside the library window. Now it means clarity. The flakes hit the glass like tiny truths tapping to be seen. I zipped my coat, clutched the folder tighter. The season that froze me also thawed the truth. And tomorrow, I'm knocking on their door, with the law. I hadn't seen the house in daylight since everything unraveled. It stood too perfectly, trimmed hedges, the glow of porch lanterns timed to flicker on at sunset. Meredith's invitation arrived 2 days prior, dinner, just to talk. No pressure. It felt like bait dipped in nostalgia. I wore black slacks, a neutral blouse. Simple. Non-confrontational. In my bag, a legal pad, a pen, and a voice recorder switched on before I rang the bell. Meredith opened the door with that practiced smile, the one she wore at church galas. Clayton offered a handshake. His grip was firm, but the warmth was missing. The dining table gleamed. Polished silver. Ornate plates. Meredith moved like a hostess from a lifestyle magazine, but every motion was calculated. Beckham was already seated, whispering to Jolene. Jolene covered her mouth when she laughed. I watched her eyes dart toward me, then down to her lap. That same nervous tick from when she lied as a kid. Clayton stood to toast. Family means staying together even when we disagree. His glass hovered in the air. I mirrored the motion, raised mine too. But his eyes never found mine. He wasn't speaking to me, he was speaking over me, to the idea of me. The daughter who never left. The compliant version he could still control. I smiled. Small. Silent. But inside, I was taking notes, mentally and literally. Every glance avoided. Every word polished for the sake of performance. I nodded at all the right times, the dutiful daughter making her cameo. The table felt less like a reunion and more like a setup. If you play along long enough, does the game stop, or do you just forget there was a game at all? During dessert, Meredith's fork clinked against her plate, then she pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it toward me. Just administrative, darling. For everyone's peace of mind. I opened it. The document wore a soft, cursive font, the kind found on wedding invitations. At the top, consent waiver and transfer of guardianship. Embedded in the corner, the family crest. Polite paper. Deadly ink. Clayton cleared his throat. Since she left the car, I don't want responsibility. Sign this and it's done. The recorder in my handbag clicked silently in rhythm with my pulse. That one sentence, I'd needed it more than anything. I picked up the pen. Signed with a soft flourish. Then raised my glass and smiled again. They thought they were negotiating with a child. I was negotiating with my future. When the paper looks polite, is it a handshake or a noose? Back at my temporary apartment, I spread everything across the small kitchen table: tonight's document, the recorded file, every scan and photo from weeks past. The war no longer felt abstract. I opened my laptop and typed one sentence to Dorian: "I've signed. Let's begin." His reply was quick: "They now have a short window to move." But so do we. You've got leverage. I knew what I had to do. I submitted a formal FOIA request, not just for my personal records, but for anything linking the family trust, the neighborhood amenity board, and my legal name. Paper trails don't lie. They just need to be followed. Francesca's voice echoed in memory: "Records don't hide. Only people try to vanish in them." I would not vanish. Have you ever signed something to make the noise stop only to realize you were signing your rights away? That night, I walked back through the gates of my childhood home. Alone. No suitcase. No longing. Not as a daughter. As an investigator. The sky was bruised purple. Light snow drifted from low clouds. I paused at the top step, breath fogging the glass pane on the front door. Inside, I could hear a laugh. Jolene, maybe. The warmth inside belonged to strangers now. I whispered to the door, "This isn't goodbye. It's goodbye to them. Tomorrow they'll wake up believing they still control the game. And I'll show them I already moved the pieces." Beckham called right after sunset. His voice was soft, almost kind. "We can make this simple, Odessa, $1,500 a month. Walk away quietly, and you don't have to deal with the rest." He said it like a blessing. Like an olive branch. But I knew the tone too well. It was how he used to convince our cousins to give up their turn at the lake house when we were kids. Smile, soothe, spin. My eyes scanned the numbers he read aloud. Something was off. I asked for the routing info, claiming I'd think about it. He hesitated, then gave it. That was his mistake. I hung up, smiled to myself, then opened a notepad. Date. Time. Routing numbers. Bank contact. All logged. Later that night, I cross-checked those numbers with my credit watch alerts. The loan funding that $1,500 a month offer? Pulled against a loan under my social security number, without my consent. Beckham hadn't offered me relief. He tried to bribe me with my own stolen name. When someone offers you freedom with a price tag, do you pay, or flip the contract? The next morning, I walked into First Valley Bank with my chin held high and my coat still buttoned. It wasn't about anger. It was about facts. The teller, a woman named Vicky, frowned as she scanned her screen. "This loan's been active for 8 months, she said softly. "Signed digitally under your credentials." But it wasn't me. "I believe you," she replied, and that was enough. They flagged the account for internal investigation. I didn't smile. Not yet. Outside, I took out my phone and opened a blank document. A ledger. Not of money. Of moments. Every phone call, every transaction. Every offer they tried to frame as help. I wrote, attempted coercion under guise of reconciliation. Note, loan traces back to Beckham, disguised under emergency consolidation. I texted Trinley a single line, "How many times have you watched them count my life as a budget line?" No reply. Maya Angelou once said, "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." I wasn't being reduced. I was being remade. What happens when your value is measured by dollars instead of dignity? Later that afternoon, Dorian and I sat across from each other in his office. The air smelled like old books and new dust. "You don't cash the check," he said. "You don't respond to the offer. You file the complaint. You make their solutions look like admissions." I nodded. That night, I went live. Just me, my phone propped against a chipped mug, and the soft hum of my temporary heater in the background. "Tonight," I said, "someone offered me peace for a monthly fee. But it wasn't peace. It was payment to disappear." I held up part of the ledger, redacted names, bank references, vague contracts, all meant to bury the truth under polite formatting. No rants. No tears. Just the facts. The story, plain and cruel. Viewers trickled in. Then hundreds. Then thousands. The comments flowed. Most in support. Some cruel. But I expected that. What I didn't expect was Beckham's response. A restraining notice. Filed within hours. He claimed harassment, emotional damage. He said I had gone unstable again. But I had the call. The offer. The account. I uploaded the recording to a secure drive. Sent it to Dorian. Saved copies on 3 flash drives, one in my boot heel. At midnight, my doorbell rang. I didn't answer. But when I opened the door in the morning, a plain white cup sat outside, steam still curling from the lid. Under it, a sticky note. "They know you're waking up." I brought it inside and set it on the table beside my list of names. If the world thinks you owe them silence, what if you speak anyway? I turned off my phone. Took a shower. Got dressed. And packed nothing but my recorder, a folder, and the flash drives. Standing in the hallway mirror, I stared at my own reflection. No longer the girl kicked out on a highway. No longer the ghost. I was someone with receipts. With a voice. I texted Dorian, "Let's proceed at dawn." Then I turned the phone off and placed it in the drawer. Outside, Fresno's skyline caught the first light, not bright, but determined. As I walked out, wind in my hair, I whispered, offering me half my life, they forgot I never sold it. Tomorrow they will wake believing I made the bargain. But I walked out while they counted the money. At 7:30 a.m., I crossed the courthouse plaza under a sky washed in pale gray, the columns rising like ancient sentinels. The air was sharp with cold and tension. I pulled my coat tighter as I stepped inside, every echo of my boots bouncing between the stone walls like a countdown. The clerk didn't look at me when she handed me the envelope. Ruel, Odessa. Petition for temporary guardianship. I stared down at the heading. It felt like a rerun of a nightmare I'd finally outrun, until this moment. Inside was Dr. Howard Lee's letter, the same man who once offered me a tissue more than advice. He called me mentally compromised, easily agitated, unable to manage essential decisions. The diagnosis was dressed up in soft language but aimed to chain me. Clayton and Meredith had filed it. They weren't just coming for my autonomy. They were staging a quiet erasure. But I didn't flinch. I folded the document cleanly and slid it into my case. I had learned to survive storms by dressing for the fallout. When someone takes your future in the early morning light, how do you rise back before noon? By 10, the courtroom buzzed like a wasp's nest. Reporters filled one side, family friends on the other, pretending to be neutral while judging silently. Beckham lounged with Jolene, who glanced at me like I'd brought shame on a dynasty. Then Dorian walked in. Calm. Deliberate. He carried a file thick enough to be considered a weapon. The judge called the case. Ruel versus Ruel. There it was. War spelled out in plain black letters. Meredith took the stand. She looked pristine, pearls, pressed blouse, her voice a soft blend of sorrow and concern. Odessa's always been fragile. We only want what's best. Structure. Safety. Her lawyer, Coleman, nodded solemnly. His eyes never touched mine. Then came the moment. Your Honor, Dorian said, standing, we'd like to introduce a short audio recording. He pressed play. Clayton's voice spilled into the courtroom. Since she left the car, I don't want responsibility. Sign this and it's done. Gasps. Whispers. The judge raised an eyebrow. Even the bailiff leaned forward. Beckham's smirk melted. Jolene gripped the bench. I sat still. My hands weren't shaking. My throat didn't close. I had been preparing for this moment for months. Do you believe silence always means weakness, or can it mean preparation? The judge removed his glasses, looked at both sides, then cleared his throat. The court finds that the petition for guardianship is not only without merit but was submitted with misleading intent, supported by manipulated medical documentation and evidence of coercion. He looked directly at Clayton, then Meredith. Petition denied. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, like the second before thunder. Jolene looked like she might cry. Beckham didn't even pretend to be stoic. Meredith blinked rapidly, trying to swallow her pride with dry air. I exhaled, long and steady. Dorian leaned in. This is only phase 1. I nodded. I wasn't celebrating. I was calculating. As we walked out, a young reporter met me on the steps. Ms. Ruel, what's next? I didn't pause. Truth. And nothing less. When you win your fight in public, do you walk away, or walk forward? Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to something softer. I felt Fresno's winter light on my face, not cold now, just honest. I took out my phone and called the number for the advocacy network. It's done, I said. They failed. They cheered on the other end. Real joy, no strings. Across the parking lot, Beckham lingered near a car. I saw him glance over, waiting for a reaction. I gave him a single nod, not approval, not rage. Just acknowledgement that I saw him. I always did. I slid into the driver's seat of my rental. My hands were steady on the wheel. The courthouse behind me had tried to swallow me whole. But I'd walked out not just intact, but remade. They thought they were burying me in papers. I walked out carrying their shadows, and left them behind. The courthouse hallway still echoed in my ears as I sat across from Dorian in his downtown office, papers spread between us like battle plans. The sun had long set, leaving only the overhead fluorescence to illuminate our victory. But we both knew one courtroom win wasn't the end. It was the invitation for another round. They'll push back, Dorian said, flipping through a file, probably through money. They have more of it. That's their game. I nodded, already glancing at the worn pages of Francesca's old notebook. My grandmother's voice echoed from memory, justice is slow, but truth doesn't rest. We hit back, I said. Not emotionally. Strategically. I didn't want retribution. I wanted conclusion. So I made the call, we'd countersue fraud and emotional distress. No more dodging. No more silence. Have you ever realized that winning once isn't enough, you have to protect the win? Over the next 3 days, we drafted the complaint. Dorian moved like a surgeon. Maravix, our forensic specialist, obtained internal banking documents that twisted my stomach, wire logs, forged entries, false credit lines. And then it landed. Buried in a PDF of loan signatures was mine, on a $200,000 home equity loan I never signed. Dorian's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. This wasn't just misuse. It's criminal. Jolene forged this. I stared at the signature. Perfect strokes. Almost mine. My fists clenched, but I breathed deep. Rage burns too fast. We're building firewood, not fireworks. We documented every dollar, every transfer. A paper trail through my stolen name. Dorian smiled, darkly. Fraud leaves fingerprints in numbers. I replied, and I've got the gloves off. What would you do if your own family built their comfort on your stolen name? The suit dropped like a hammer. Jolene and Beckham didn't see it coming. Clayton's attorney filed for delay, labeling me unstable again. But we'd learned. My financial records, therapist's affidavit, and public live streams shut down their narrative before it started. Beckham arrived for deposition. I sat quietly in the corner, watching him squirm beneath Dorian's questions. Did you authorize this loan? I didn't handle the paperwork. Then who did? A pause. Jolene. It landed like a punch in the gut of their defense. He tried to backtrack, but the recorder didn't stutter. Neither did Dorian. The room fell silent when they offered settlement. I answered with a whisper that cut sharper than a shout, you can't settle a conscience. If the truth finally tips the scales, can you ever forgive the hands that held them crooked? That night, I drove alone through Fresno's shadowed streets, the air cool but not biting. I passed closed shops, quiet diners, lit gas stations, each one a blur. I pulled into an old 24-hour cafe, ordered coffee, and sat with a pen and notepad. I didn't write names. I wrote a sentence. Tomorrow, it's not revenge, it's release. At 1:13 a.m., Dorian called. The judge is moving. Charges for identity theft are likely. I said nothing for a beat, then finally, okay. I looked outside. The streetlights glowed against my windshield, like ghosts losing their shape. I took back my name, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone listening. They built a kingdom on paper lies. Tomorrow, I'll burn the paper. The call came just after sunrise. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the voice, shaky but certain, spoke through a withheld number. There's something in the vault, the man said. You should see it before someone makes it vanish. He wouldn't give his name. Just an address, a time, and a warning, they've already rewritten enough history. Dorian told me not to go. It smells like bait, he said, you've rattled enough cages this week. But I couldn't ignore the feeling in my chest. Sometimes the last lie hides in the oldest file. Before I left, I pulled out the old microfiche reader my mom used to teach me with. I remembered her fingers gliding across pages in silence. Truth never needs volume, she once whispered to me in a dusty library corner. At 8:14 a.m., I signed in at the downtown Fresno bank. The security guard glanced at me twice but said nothing. Inside the vault, the air was dry and still. The door creaked open slowly, metal groaning like it knew secrets. Have you ever felt the silence in a room scream louder than the people in it? I followed the guide down rows of locked drawers until we stopped at Record Vault 92. One manila file. Inside, a loan application from 2003, supposedly signed by Francesca Ruel. It looked neat, practiced. But the signature was traced, visibly. A second line beneath hers, different ink, same loop. My grandmother never looped her R. But the Real break came in the index log. A safety deposit box, opened 5 years ago, listed under my name. I didn't open anything, I told the clerk. He stared at the form. It's marked as verified. Initials, J.R. Jolene. They gave me gloves, keys, and silence. Inside the box, a photograph of me at age 10, standing next to Francesca at her garden fence. A folded letter, and signed, but clearly in her handwriting, hinting at a trust fund she was setting up. And at the bottom, a copy of her will. Voided. No court stamp. I didn't cry for the money. I cried because they'd stolen her last wish. They didn't just steal dollars, they robbed her dying wish. What matters more, what was left to you or what was stolen before you knew it existed? I drove straight to Dorian's office, nearly forgot to shut the car door. Dropped the box on his table like evidence at a crime scene. He skimmed the papers, then examined the letterhead and signature patterns. These are altered, he said. The original was tampered with before probate. They invalidated it intentionally. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. From betrayal. This is grounds for a probate fraud case, Dorian said. And intent to defraud. They didn't just hide this. They erased it. Will it be enough? I asked. Dorian looked up, calm and sure. It's not just enough, it's a pattern. We made new folders. Not just legal ones, media ones. Public ones. People hate liars, Dorian said, but they despise family liars. Would you go public with your trauma if it meant protecting someone else's legacy? By nightfall, I was driving alone again, streetlights blinking past my windshield like slow-motion bullets. A low thunder rolled far in the distance. I didn't head straight home. I went to the cemetery. Francesca's grave sat beneath a patch of oak shadow. I placed the photo there, gently. I found your truth, I whispered. Back home, I felt lighter even as the storm began above. But on the floor, under my door, was a letter, folded once, handwritten. The penmanship was unmistakable, Jolene's. Be careful. Blood runs dry, but not clean. I opened it fully. The last line read, "You were never supposed to find that box." The morning sun didn't blaze. It seeped gently through the windows of the Fresno Community Center, brushing the pale linoleum floors in soft gold. I walked in quietly, still carrying the weight of the past week in my shoulders, but not in my chest. There, something lighter stirred. The women were already gathered, sitting in a circle of second-hand chairs. Some clutched notebooks. Others stared at their laps, silent. I saw them, middle-aged, elderly, younger than me. None of us fit one mold. But our stories shared a rhythm, exploitation, silence, escape. I sat and listened. A woman with tired eyes and a blue scarf said, "I thought I was weak until I found out they were scared of me." The air shifted. We weren't here to confess. We were here to reclaim. I thought about the quote I kept on my wall for years, "Turn your wounds into wisdom." I never really understood it, until now. When it was my turn, I introduced myself. I'm Odessa. I lost more than money. I lost my name, for a while. But I got it back. My voice trembled, then steadied. I'm here because I don't want to see anyone else lose theirs. Have you ever turned the pain you refuse to bury into strength you're proud to build? Later that morning, I found myself walking the gravel path to Francesca's memorial garden. I held a tiny lavender plant in one hand, its roots wrapped in burlap. The breeze smelled like sage and soil. Her headstone sat just as I left it. Simple. Unadorned. I knelt beside it, pressing the plant gently into the earth. You promised I'd bloom, I whispered, brushing dirt from my hands. I just didn't know it meant this way. I opened the binder I'd brought, my road map. Pages marked with names of women I'd already spoken to, ideas for legal workshops, partnerships, grants to apply for. A non-profit was forming, not from ambition but from need. Safe money for women wasn't just a name, it was a reckoning. I thought of the last thing Francesca wrote to me, use your silence as a bridge, not a burden. I carried her words like a compass. If you've ever felt invisible, how do you make yourself seen without losing who you are? Back at my apartment, I cleared the cluttered table and spread out the early pieces of my plan. A half-written mission statement. A hand-drawn flyer. The title at the top read, "Your name is not your asset." I called Mara first. She'd seen firsthand how easy it was to overlook financial abuse. Then Dorian, who offered to review contracts pro bono. The list grew. So did my confidence. I opened my laptop and began drafting the pilot workshop. The first session would focus on red flags in family finances. The second? Legal tools. Protection. The truth. It wasn't flashy work, but it was fire under frost. Then an email pinged, Dorian. Civil case is scheduled. You still lead the message. This time, I didn't feel the need to armor up. I wasn't alone in the fight anymore. When you win a battle, do you rest or do you start the mission you were fighting for? Evening came, and with it, a pull I couldn't ignore. I packed a small bag and got into the rental car, steering it toward the old highway. The same one my parents had left me on. The road hadn't changed, but I had. I played the radio low. A woman's voice sang, "Turn your face to the sun, and the shadows fall behind you." I smiled without meaning to. I stopped at a familiar rest area. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to mark the place where the story broke wide open. Looking into the side mirror, I no longer saw a girl hoping to be rescued. I saw someone who'd written her own rescue. Who'd turned a forced exit into an earned return. I picked up my phone and hit record. If you're listening, don't let your story be their choice. Be your own chapter. I ended the recording, saved it. Not for them. For me. For anyone who needed to know survival was only the beginning. My fight didn't end today. It changed form. Tomorrow, I'd build what they tore down. The morning sun didn't blaze. It seeped gently through the windows of the Fresno Community Center, brushing the pale linoleum floors in soft gold. I walked in quietly, still carrying the weight of the past week in my shoulders, but not in my chest. There, something lighter stirred. The women were already gathered, sitting in a circle of second-hand chairs. Some clutched notebooks. Others stared at their laps, silent. I saw them, middle-aged, elderly, younger than me. None of us fit one mold. But our stories shared a rhythm, exploitation, silence, escape. I sat and listened. A woman with tired eyes and a blue scarf said, "I thought I was weak until I found out they were scared of me." The air shifted. We weren't here to confess. We were here to reclaim. I thought about the quote I kept on my wall for years, "Turn your wounds into wisdom." I never really understood it, until now. When it was my turn, I introduced myself. I'm Odessa. I lost more than money. I lost my name, for a while. But I got it back. My voice trembled, then steadied. I'm here because I don't want to see anyone else lose theirs. Have you ever turned the pain you refuse to bury into strength you're proud to build? Later that morning, I found myself walking the gravel path to Francesca's memorial garden. I held a tiny lavender plant in one hand, its roots wrapped in burlap. The breeze smelled like sage and soil. Her headstone sat just as I left it. Simple. Unadorned. I knelt beside it, pressing the plant gently into the earth. You promised I'd bloom, I whispered, brushing dirt from my hands. I just didn't know it meant this way. I opened the binder I'd brought, my road map. Pages marked with names of women I'd already spoken to, ideas for legal workshops, partnerships, grants to apply for. A non-profit was forming, not from ambition but from need. Safe money for women wasn't just a name, it was a reckoning. I thought of the last thing Francesca wrote to me, use your silence as a bridge, not a burden. I carried her words like a compass. If you've ever felt invisible, how do you make yourself seen without losing who you are? Back at my apartment, I cleared the cluttered table and spread out the early pieces of my plan. A half-written mission statement. A hand-drawn flyer. The title at the top read, "Your name is not your asset." I called Mara first. She'd seen firsthand how easy it was to overlook financial abuse. Then Dorian, who offered to review contracts pro bono. The list grew. So did my confidence. I opened my laptop and began drafting the pilot workshop. The first session would focus on red flags in family finances. The second? Legal tools. Protection. The truth. It wasn't flashy work, but it was fire under frost. Then an email pinged, Dorian. Civil case is scheduled. You still lead the message. This time, I didn't feel the need to armor up. I wasn't alone in the fight anymore. When you win a battle, do you rest or do you start the mission you were fighting for? Evening came, and with it, a pull I couldn't ignore. I packed a small bag and got into the rental car, steering it toward the old highway. The same one my parents had left me on. The road hadn't changed, but I had. I played the radio low. A woman's voice sang, "Turn your face to the sun, and the shadows fall behind you." I smiled without meaning to. I stopped at a familiar rest area. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to mark the place where the story broke wide open. Looking into the side mirror, I no longer saw a girl hoping to be rescued. I saw someone who'd written her own rescue. Who'd turned a forced exit into an earned return. I picked up my phone and hit record. If you're listening, don't let your story be their choice. Be your own chapter. I ended the recording, saved it. Not for them. For me. For anyone who needed to know survival was only the beginning. My fight didn't end today. It changed form. Tomorrow, I'd build what they tore down. The engine hummed beneath my fingertips, steady as breath. Morning hadn't quite broken, but the blue tinge of sky promised it would soon. I was parked on the edge of Highway 41, just a few yards from the very spot where it all began, where they left me. No money. No plan. Just a bag and a sentence that rang in my ears for months after. Do whatever you want. Back then, it was dismissal. Now, it sounded like a challenge I had long since accepted, and won. I eased the silver rental sedan onto the asphalt, watching the white lines scroll under the headlights like old film. The road was quiet. The hum of tires felt like applause in slow motion. Jimmy Buffett crooned through the speakers, changes in latitudes, changes in attitudes. I chuckled. Even fate had a sense of humor. When you were left at the roadside, did you start the engine or just wait for someone else to drive? Downtown Fresno was just waking up when I pulled into the parking lot of my new office. Nothing fancy. A one-story unit with sun-yellow walls and big front windows still covered with newspaper. The paper would come down today. I unlocked the door and stepped into the echo of possibility. The room smelled like old paint and new paper. I carried in a box marked Francesca. Inside was a framed letter, her handwriting, her words, "You have more value than a signature line." I hung it first, right by the front desk. The first 2 volunteers arrived just as I was straightening the frame. Familiar faces. We had shared quiet nights in the shelter's lounge. They smiled, not with pity, but with respect. We had all changed since then. On my desk was a thick file folder labeled Case 0, My Own Journey. It wasn't for closure. It was for instruction. Today, it would be the centerpiece of our first workshop under the name Ruel Writes. How do you turn the room where your world was stripped from you into the place you rebuild it? After lunch, I sat in the driver's seat again. Not going anywhere in particular, just reflecting. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found the number that used to make my stomach knot. Mom. I hit call. It rang. Then voicemail. Hi. I don't need you to understand. I just needed to say this for me. I took the wheel. I will not let your refusal define my direction. Goodbye. No tears. No regrets. Just release. I closed the app. Set the phone aside. The road stretched ahead, wide and dust-colored in the afternoon sun. I pressed gently on the gas. Not to run, but to move. Speed now meant control, not fear. If you were handed the keys to your life, would you look back, or drive forward? The overlook above San Joaquin Valley bathed in warm pink and honey light. I parked, got out, and leaned against the hood. Miles of golden fields shimmered under the rising sun. No borders. No chains. I opened the glove box and placed 2 things inside, a photo of Francesca, smiling in her garden, and the letter she wrote me, the one that never saw a lawyer's desk, but rewrote my entire future. We made it, I whispered. Then, with one hand on the door and the other on the steering wheel, I smiled, quiet and whole. I pulled out my notebook and scribbled the final sentence on the last page. This story belongs to me now. The engine turned over without hesitation. They once told me to do whatever I wanted. I did. And I'm just beginning.